Hello everyone! Today I want to talk to you about a big problem we have as a society. Everywhere around the world, the Nazi movement is gaining traction in the Western countries, and just like what happened during the years before the Second World War broke out, this is linked to the stories we tell. I want to focus on one story in particular since the franchise has a new game coming out this year. I'm talking about the Warhammer 40K franchise. I'm the endorsist and this is Review of the Month. 1. The game system. All the game systems for role-playing games in the Warhammer 40K universe are rather boring and lack innovation. Dark Heresy, Rogue Trader, Deathwatch, Black Crusade and Only War all use the same system with slight variations for mood. They bring nothing new to the table in terms of game mechanics that other games haven't done better. And not only these games are generic, but the combat system is a little on the overcomplicated side. The only appeal the game system could have is for people who play the figure-in war game because some mechanics are similar, like the base stats and the name of the weapons. And this is a bit concerning because usually you want your game system to be unique and innovative in order to highlight the lore of your game. A lack of new ideas in the rules usually leads to a repetitive experience. And you want to avoid this if you want your game to be good. For example, right now I'm playing an online campaign with a game that has 12 gods and the skills are divided in 12 groups to reflect your character's affinity with the different divinities. Click the card on the top right part of the video now if you want to check out that game and see how a good system fits the story that it tells. 2. The lore and themes of the game. When I first encountered the lore of the Warhammer 40K universe, I really liked it. It's a setting in which humanity has formed a large empire among the stars that is crumbling under the strain of exterior enemies, internal corruption, and an incompetent administration. When I analyzed the ideas within that universe, I found something hilarious. This setting was a horrible dystopian monster in which the humans had to turn to ideals of the far right and fascism in order to survive. The entire logic of the setting is pushed to the limit in order to justify why humanity would have to turn to this ideology to survive. And to me, it was hilarious, because it shows just how illogical the far right is. Warhammer 40K has so much ridiculous horror that humanity would have to endure simply to justify a fascism that makes sense in context, and it illustrated how illogical it is in our world. I'm going to explain what I mean now and give a refresher course on the Warhammer 40K universe to anyone who is new to the setting or who doesn't understand what I'm talking about. So, in this setting, there are 4 major gods of chaos who like to corrupt things, especially human souls, and they are very good at it. During the time humanity was expanding to the stars, these gods of chaos messed things up a lot of the time. Luckily, mankind had a sort of god of order called the God Emperor that was trying to combat that corruption until the gods of chaos corrupted half of his children into rebelling against him and half killing him. In the present of the setting, only faith to the Emperor and his empire can protect you from the corruption of chaos, a corruption that is physical just as it is mental. You see, when you get corrupted by chaos, it slowly changes your body into a monstrous creature. And so most people adhere to a strict and fervent worship of the god of mankind and his state, rejecting any idea that isn't preached by the church or the state. Sound familiar? That strict worship is exactly what fascist governments use to keep their populations in check. That and the fear of outside ideas and outsiders. The Imperium of Man has these outsiders too, in the shape of aliens like the mysterious Eldars, the brutal Orcs, the innovative Tau, and many more, who are all trying to fight for dominance over their part of the galaxy. This is why the Imperium has to make super soldiers in the form of space marines. These dudes are a Nazi's wet dream. They are twice as tall as normal humans, they go through a training that kills most recruits before they get boosted even more by super armors with symbols on them that are a bit familiar. Yup, The skull and bones that the Gestapo had on their uniforms is literally plastered all over the Space Marines that could easily be called superhuman, or, as the Germans would have said, Übermensch. In Warhammer 40K, a legion of super soldiers wearing Nazi paraphernalia are the last line of defense of humanity against aliens. So I looked at all of this and I was sure this had to be satire. There was, after all, a lot of self-awareness in the lore that criticized the fascist system under which humans live in the Imperium. The lore describes that normal folks have to work themselves to death to power the war machine that defends them, and that any rebellion is brutally repressed. On top of that, the Emperor himself didn't want to be worshipped, knowing that religion was a tool to enslave humanity. Yet, after his assassination, he couldn't do anything to prevent the state from transforming his ideals for a peaceful empire into a dogma that enslaved humanity. And so for many years, I played this game with my friends, and we joked about the setting being ridiculously horrible for everyone involved. But all of that changed when I GM'd for the first time for members of the community. That is when I realized that, number 3, neo-Nazis and right-wing players literally think America is the Imperium. You see, it isn't hard to make the comparison between the setting of 40K and how neo-Nazis see America, or any of the first world countries that they happen to be in, like European countries. The God Emperor is Jesus, protecting humanity from having ideas that would corrupt them. The gods of chaos and their new ideas represent other religions, sources of knowledge that contradict the fascist ideology for Tzeentch, who is the god of forbidden knowledge. And they also represent other military powers for Khorne, the god of war. This god literally corrupts you by allowing you to feel pleasure in new ways and allowing you to change your body. So yeah, all the hate against Slaanesh that the Imperium dishes out is similar to the hate Nazis have for anyone in the LGBT plus community. You can also see similarities between some of the aliens in 40K and people of color. The Eldars, for example, are a race that dominated the galaxy before the arrival of humans, and they have a different culture that honors their ancestors in a different way than humans do. The Imperium sees them as sometimes allies, sometimes enemies, depending on what is most convenient at the time. The Eldars are few in numbers nowadays, but they stay relevant because they inhabit a lot of spaces all over the Imperium. They seem in many ways to mirror the Native Americans whose lands were overtaken by white settlers during the horrible colonization of America. The Orcs are brutal and stupid, and a mass of invading monsters that is a clear substitute for how Nazis see immigrants. And the Tau are space communists with new technologies that could take over humanity and a new way of life. These parallels, whether or not they were made intentionally by the creators of the game, are harmful because they mirror reality inaccurately and reinforce the idea that you need to fear what is different from you. The Orcs in Warhammer are a menace to all life. The Eldars value the life of one of their own over 1,000 humans and cause the demise of their civilization themselves. All these points make them look like the bad guys, and their association with people in real life is harmful. It's also important to note that the servants of the gods of chaos are called demons. So this game literally demonizes and alienates anyone who would be at the receiving end of fascist movements by making them into literal demons and aliens. Also, quick side note, Warhammer Battle does the same thing. There are practically no people of color among the humans. The armies of Arabia are super stereotypical, using flying carpets to move around. The undead are represented in an Egyptian style, and finally, the lizardmen are coded as native South Americans. But white people from the equivalent of Europe are simply represented as humans. I realized that this setting, which I personally saw as satire, was actually seen as a platform that reflected the ideas of many blooming neo-Nazis when I played with members of the online community. My players were from all over the United States and they didn't know each other, but they instantly bonded over shared ideas like fear of immigrants that were promoted by the setting. All of them were in favor of police brutality against minorities, sexism, and homophobia. And they were pretty horrible excuses for human beings. Suffice to say, I ended that game pretty quickly. But I've been looking into the Warhammer community and I have found that these players aren't an isolated incident. They are the norm in the community. And all that was the fault of the company that created the setting. 4. Games Workshop is also like the Imperium. After the death of the Emperor, the Imperium had a choice. Taking a risk by innovating, creating a new ideology that might unite the Empire to try something new, or let the growing worship of the Emperor and fascism drive it forward and hope it all worked out okay. It did not, because they chose the latter. The Imperium is now on the edge of crumbling under its own inability to make new technology or change the way it works and exploits its people. Game Workshop had to make a very similar choice. They created Warhammer 40K and they had the monopoly on wargames for a while. Then, the far right started flunking to their game like moths to a flame. They could have come up with a new product that would have taken the company in a new direction at a financial risk. Or they could give a platform for the ideas of the far right to grow. They, like the Imperium, chose wrong. They kept going, and today many accounts talk about a community that is unabashedly racist, sexist, and adheres to the same ideals that the Imperium does. And this could have been prevented if only Games Workshop hadn't decided to keep milking the cash cow that is Warhammer 40K. Now, I'm not saying all the Warhammer 40K fans share these ideals, and if you're a fan who isn't aligned with these horrible ideas, good for you. But it should concern you that so many in your hobby align with the fascist ideology. And it's a real problem. You see, the way we tell stories shape the way we see the world. When the Nazis were on the rise in Germany, they justified their ideologies with stories and films that demonized Jews. We have to be careful about the meaning of the stories we tell. That is why I, the endorsist, cannot endorse buying any products from Games Workshop, especially not their latest book, Wrath and Glory. And if you play it after you download any of their games or you own one already, please, for the love of God, make sure everyone at your game knows it is satire. 5. What you should buy instead. My Little Pony role-playing game, Tales of Equestria. You think I'm joking? Would you rather buy a game from a company that supports neo-Nazi ideals, or try one whose tagline is "Friendship is magic"? If you chose the first one, then maybe you need to reconsider your life choices. It is no coincidence that the figurine players of Warhammer 40K support the brutal lore of their game. After all, they had to endure a lot of mocking for playing with toy soldiers. In order to separate themselves from the idea that their hobby was for children, figurine players favored a game with adult themes and complex rules. But, in trying to destroy the prejudice aimed at their hobby, they supported lore that augmented the prejudice aimed at others. That is why I want to say, it's okay to like your hobby, and I wouldn't judge anyone for playing with My Little Pony figurines instead of Warhammer figurines. There's nothing wrong with either hobby, but there is something wrong with the values imparted by the lore of Warhammer 40K and Games Workshop. If you want to spread awareness and contribute to discarding the fascists in role-playing game community, please share this video around. Comment below the video what role-playing game you want me to cover next, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.